The wooden doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open slowly, their sound cutting through the murmur of quiet conversations. Every head in the room turned, as if drawn by an invisible force. A hush fell over the crowded space. Even the tapping pens and shifting papers came to a stop. Standing there, framed by the doorway and the soft morning light streaming in behind him, was Keanu Reeves. But this was not the glamorous Keanu that fans usually saw in movies or red carpets. This was a man carrying the heavy weight of something. Unseen, his face calm but tired, his dark eyes reflecting quiet sadness and deep thought. At his side, walking step for step, was a large German shepherd. The dog moved with grace and purpose, its coat shining and its eyes focused as though it understood everything about this strange room. Keanu paused for a moment at the threshold, glancing down at the dog, who looked back up at him with complete trust. Then without a word, they stepped forward together. The sound of their footsteps echoed across the courtroom floor, a slow rhythm that added to the growing tension in the air. Reporters sitting in the back quickly raised their cameras, but hesitated to snap a photo, sensing that this moment was delicate, almost sacred. The judge, an older woman known as Judge Walters, sat tall behind the bench. Her face was usually stern, but today there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes as she watched Keanu approach. She cleared her throat and spoke firmly. "Why is there a dog in my courtroom?" It was a fair question. Dogs were not allowed here. This was a place of law, order, and procedure. Bringing a dog, even one so calm and quiet, was highly unusual. Everyone in the room seemed to lean forward just a little, waiting to hear what Keanu would say, but he did not rush his answer. Instead, he gave a small bow of respect toward the judge, then spoke in a low, steady voice. "Your Honor," he said gently, "my dog Max is here to help tell a truth that words alone cannot explain." His words hung in the air, soft but powerful, like a note played on a piano in a silent hall. The audience shifted in their seats, glancing at one another, wondering what truth he could possibly mean. At the opposite table sat Victor Hayes, a wealthy businessman in a perfectly tailored suit. He leaned back in his chair, a smug smile creeping across his face. He looked confident, almost amused, as though this would be an easy day for him. After all, he was the one who had brought this case to court, accusing Keanu of trespassing on his private property and causing damage. To Victor, this was a simple legal matter, a chance to humiliate a famous man and come out on top. But then, as everyone watched, Keanu did something subtle but strange. He lowered his right hand slightly and made a small gesture toward Max. It was not a command in words, but a signal, a quiet language shared between man and dog. Immediately, Max sat down next to the judge's bench, his posture perfect, his gaze fixed on Judge Walters as if he were waiting for her to speak. The judge froze for a brief second. She felt something she could not explain. This dog's presence, his calm dignity, his silent watchfulness. It made her heart beat just a little faster. This was no ordinary animal. There was a story here. Something hidden. Something important. She took a deep breath and asked again, more carefully this time, "Mr. Reeves, why was your dog on Mr. Hayes' property at all?" Keanu met her gaze, his voice still quiet, but filled with a quiet strength that commanded respect. "Your Honor," he said, "this is not just about my dog walking on someone's land. It is about a promise. A promise I made long ago to someone I lost." His words caused a ripple through the courtroom. A promise, someone he lost. These were not the words of a man fighting for property rights or fame. These were the words of a man carrying grief, loyalty, and unfinished business. Keanu single quotes eyes softened as memories rushed back to him. Years ago, before the fame and fortune, before the world knew his name, he had found peace in that very place. A quiet field on the edge of town. It was where he and his late girlfriend would spend quiet afternoons, far from cameras and noise. It was there that they had found Max, then just a small stray puppy, hungry and scared. Together they cared for him, raised him, and made that land their sanctuary. But then came the tragedy that shattered everything. She was gone, leaving behind an emptiness that Keanu never fully healed from. After her passing, he stayed away from that place, unable to face the memories it held. Years passed. But one day, during a quiet walk, Max began to pull gently at his leash whenever they passed the path leading back to that land. Again and again, Max would stop and look back, his tail wagging softly as if urging Keanu to return. When Keanu finally gave in and walked through the gates, he found that everything had changed. Victor Hayes had bought the land, fenced it off, and placed security cameras around it. Signs warned no trespassing. But what caught Keanu's eye most was not the fences or the signs. It was the strange machines, the deep holes dug in certain places, the workers moving quickly late at night. And then, as they walked quietly along a forgotten trail, Max began digging near the old stream where they had once sat together. He dug eagerly, paws pushing aside the soil, until he uncovered a small piece of cloth, old, weathered, and bearing a strange symbol that Keanu did not recognize. Now, back in the courtroom, that very piece of cloth sat inside a small bag resting near Keanu's chair. Victor Hayes cleared his throat loudly, breaking the spell. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with irritation, "this has nothing to do with the case. This is a simple matter of trespassing and property damage. I ask that you strike this nonsense from the record." But Judge Walters held up her hand, silencing him. She turned to Keanu and spoke gently. "Please continue, Mr. Reeves." Keanu nodded. "Your Honor," he said, "I promise that before this day ends, you will understand why my dog Max is here, and why he has done nothing wrong." Then he gave another small signal. Max rose to his feet, walked calmly to the bag, took the strap gently between his teeth, and carried it carefully to the judge's bench. He placed it at her feet, then sat again, waiting. The judge hesitated only for a moment before leaning forward and opening the bag. Inside, she found the small piece of cloth. She held it up for the courtroom to see. The fabric was rough, torn at the edges, and marked with a symbol that made her eyes narrow in thought. She looked at Keanu and asked quietly, "What is this symbol, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu answered slowly, his voice carrying deep emotion. "Your Honor, that symbol belongs to a secret that was never meant to be uncovered, and my dog Max, he found it." The silence in the courtroom was complete now. Every person sat frozen, breathless, waiting for what would come next. Judge Walters sat back in her chair, turning the cloth over in her hands, feeling the weight of history in her palm. She did not know yet what this symbol meant, but she knew in her heart that this was no ordinary trespass case. She leaned forward again and said firmly, "We will take a brief recess while I examine this." As the bailiff called the recess, Keanu sat back in his chair slowly. Max climbed gently onto the floor beside him, resting his head on Keanu's leg. Keanu placed a hand softly on Max's head and looked down at him with gratitude, respect, and love. The bond between them, a man who had lost so much and a dog who had been there through every moment of sorrow and healing, was clear for all to see. The camera would linger on this quiet image as the courtroom emptied, leaving behind only echoes of footsteps and the promise of secrets still waiting to be revealed. The story was only just beginning. The courtroom was nearly empty now, but a strange heaviness still lingered in the air. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Keanu Reeves sat quietly at the defense table, his hand gently stroking Max's thick fur. There was a silence between them, but it was not empty. It was filled with memory, filled with pain, filled with something unfinished. Max lifted his head slightly, as if sensing Keanu's thoughts. His deep brown eyes met Keanu's tired gaze. There was trust in those eyes. There was loyalty. There was history. As Keanu waited for the judge's return, his mind wandered back through time, back to the place where this all began. Years ago, that very land, now claimed and fenced by Victor Hayes, was not just a piece of property to Keanu. It was where he had found peace when peace was hard to find. It was where he had shared afternoons with the woman he loved, far away from cameras, away from gossip, away from the noise of fame. Her laugh still echoed in his mind. They would walk through the tall grass, fingers intertwined, sharing quiet conversations that needed no audience. It was in the shade of those old trees that they first heard the faint whimpering of a small creature. Following the sound, they found a tiny puppy, thin, scared, shivering. His fur was matted, his ribs showed, and his eyes were desperate for kindness. She had picked up the trembling animal and held him close. "We should take him home," she whispered softly. And in that moment, without hesitation, Max became part of their lives. Those were happy days, days when love felt simple and pure. But life, Keanu knew too well, could turn suddenly. Illness came quickly, cruelly, and one day, she was gone, leaving behind only memories, a hollow space in his heart, and Max, who stayed close to him as though determined to fill that empty space. Years, Keanu stayed away from that land. He could not bear to walk there alone, where every path and tree reminded him of her smile. But Max had not forgotten. Every time they passed the old path, Max would pull gently at his leash, pausing, looking back at Keanu with quiet insistence. Finally, one evening, Keanu had given in. They walked together through the fields again. But when they reached the stream where they had sat so many times before, Keanu saw that everything had changed. Fences surrounded the land now. Cameras watched from tall poles. Workers moved quickly under dim lights, even though the sun was setting. The land felt cold and strange, its warmth stolen by men with heavy machines. It was there, near the stream, that Max began digging. His paws worked quickly, throwing dirt behind him. At first, Keanu had thought Max was just remembering their old playtimes. But then Max uncovered something unusual, a small, torn piece of cloth, dirty and frayed, with a strange symbol stitched into it. The symbol made Keanu pause. It was nothing familiar. But it felt old, secretive, dangerous. Keanu pocketed the cloth and tried to forget it. But every walk they took after that, Max would pull him back to that same spot. Something was buried there, something deeper than anyone knew. In the present, Keanu was pulled from his thoughts as the doors creaked open again. Judge Walters stepped back into the courtroom, holding the piece of cloth carefully in her hands. Her face was pale. Something about that symbol had shaken her. She sat down and leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Reeves," she said quietly, "we will continue." Victor Hayes was already waiting, sitting upright, his smirk now replaced by tightness around his mouth. He could sense the atmosphere had changed. This was no longer an easy win. The judge spoke again. "You said you made a promise to someone you lost. What was that promise?" Keanu took a deep breath. His voice was low, steady, but filled with emotion. "Your Honor. Before she passed away, she asked me never to let the place where we made memories together become something ugly, something dishonest. She asked me to protect it, and I promised her I would." His words were simple, but in the quiet courtroom, they carried deep weight. Every person watching could feel that this was not about fame or money or even property rights. It was about love, grief, loyalty, and a promise that could not be broken. Victor Hayes laughed. Softly, a cold, bitter sound. "A love story is touching," he sneered, "but irrelevant. The land is mine. Whatever secrets Mr. Reeves thinks he found there, they are none of his business." But Keanu remained calm. He reached down and gave Max another quiet signal. Max rose from his place and walked slowly to a table near the wall where evidence was being collected. There, He scratched gently at a small leather bag that Keanu had brought with him. Inside that bag, beyond the torn cloth, were several other small objects Max had helped uncover during their visits to the fenced land. Old metal tags, broken. Tools. Even pieces of rusted machinery, each marked with that same strange symbol. The judge's eyes narrowed as she looked at the items. Something was wrong here. This land, long before Victor Hayes bought it, had a history that no one had spoken about. A history buried under soil, locked behind fences, forgotten by time. Until a dog with unshakable loyalty had dug it up. Keanu spoke again, his voice softer now but full of quiet conviction. "Your Honor, my dog Max was trained. Not in the usual way, but trained by love. He learned to trust his instincts. And those instincts led him to this place, this cloth, this symbol. It is not random, Max. He found something hidden beneath the surface." The judge hesitated for a long moment before asking her next question. "Mr. Reeves," she said carefully, "do you know what this symbol means?" Keanu shook his head slowly. "Not yet," he admitted. "But I know it matters. I know it is part of something that was never meant to come to light. And I know Max would not have led me there without a reason." Victor Hayes stood up suddenly, his voice rising. "This is a distraction," he snapped. "This case is about trespassing, nothing more," but his face was pale now. His confidence was cracking. Judge Walters turned to him sharply. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "you will speak when spoken to. This court will uncover the truth." In that moment, the courtroom audience, who had come expecting nothing more than a celebrity's legal trouble, realized that something deeper was unfolding. This was no ordinary lawsuit. As the day's session ended and the judge called for another recess, Max lay down again at Keanu's feet. Keanu placed a gentle hand on his dog's head, leaning forward until their foreheads nearly touched. It was an image that said more than words ever could. A man and his dog, bound by grief, memory, and loyalty, standing together as they prepared to uncover a dark secret no one else dared speak of. Outside the courthouse, reporters were already gathering, their cameras ready. But inside this quiet room, only silence remained, a silence heavy with the promise of revelations to come. The story was far from over. The next morning, the courtroom was filled to the brim. Every seat was taken, and people even lined the walls, their eyes fixed on the defense table where Keanu Reeves sat quietly with Max at his feet. The air was thick with curiosity and tension. Reporters whispered hurriedly into their microphones, their words rushing out to the world beyond these walls. Overnight, this case had become a sensation, not because of celebrity scandal or legal drama, but because of the strange, emotional bond between a quiet actor and his loyal dog, and the mysterious cloth that hinted at something far darker. Judge Walters entered the courtroom slowly, her face thoughtful, her fingers holding the piece of cloth carefully as though it might dissolve if she gripped it too tightly. She looked older today, weighed down by something only she knew. After a pause, she spoke softly but firmly. "Mr. Reeves, yesterday you said this cloth belongs to a secret that was never meant to be uncovered. Today, I would like you to explain what you meant." Keanu took a deep breath. His hand rested gently on Max's head, fingers brushing through his soft fur. The touch seemed to give him strength. He stood, his voice low but clear. "Your Honor, this land, long before Victor Hayes claimed it, held more than just memories for me. It held history." "Hidden history," the judge nodded slowly. "Go on." Keanu continued. "I did not know at first what Max was digging for. But when he uncovered this cloth, something told me it was important. Max kept digging near the same places, even pulling me toward areas where the ground felt different, softer, disturbed." He reached for the small leather bag at his feet. This time, he opened it carefully and pulled out a few items. Rusted tags, old metal fragments, scraps of machinery marked with the same strange symbol stitched into the cloth. They were weathered and worn, but unmistakable. The entire courtroom leaned forward. This was no longer about trespassing. This was about discovery. About history hidden beneath the surface. Judge Walters studied the objects carefully. There was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but she said nothing yet. Instead, she asked, "How did you know where to look?" Keanu smiled gently and looked down at Max. "I didn't know," he said softly, "but Max did. Every time we walked that land, he would stop, dig, sniff the air. He knew something was buried there. I trusted him. And he led me straight to these." The courtroom audience remained silent, captivated by the simplicity and strength of this bond. A man trusting his dog to reveal the truth. Then, something unexpected happened. Judge Walters held up the cloth, turning it slowly so that everyone could see the strange symbol clearly. Her voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of emotion. "This symbol," she began, "I have seen it before." Victor Hayes, who until now had remained still and quiet, suddenly shifted in his seat. His face grew pale, and his eyes darted toward the cloth as though he wished he could snatch it away and bury it forever. The judge continued, "When I was a young attorney, long before I sat on this bench, I worked briefly for a government agency investigating closed military sites. This symbol. It was used by an organization called Project Nightshade." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The name meant little to the average person, but those who had heard whispers of it knew it was connected to old government experiments, secret tests, hidden facilities, and rumors of illegal activity buried deep in history. Keanu listened carefully, his heart pounding gently in his chest. This was what Max had uncovered. Not just a hidden symbol, but a dark chapter of history buried beneath the earth. Judge Walters set the cloth down and leaned forward slightly, her gaze fixed on Victor Hayes. "Mr. Hayes," she said slowly, "did you know this land once belonged to Project Nightshade?" Victor hesitated for just a moment too long. Then, forcing a tight smile, he replied, "Your Honor, I have no knowledge of that. This is ancient history, irrelevant to the matter before this court." But his voice lacked the confidence it carried. Before Keanu remained calm, showing no anger. Instead, he knelt quietly beside Max, scratching behind his ears, showing the audience a picture of humility and respect, even in the face of deception. His silence spoke volumes. Suddenly, the mood shifted again when Max stood up on his own, walking slowly but surely toward the evidence table. He sniffed at one particular object among the items they had brought, a small rusted tag with faded writing barely visible. Keanu single quotes S. Lawyer picked it up carefully and handed it to the judge. She examined it under the courtroom's soft lights, then froze. Etched faintly into the metal were numbers. Numbers that matched old military codes from Project Nightshade. The courtroom fell into an even deeper silence. This was no coincidence. Judge Walters' face grew serious. "This court has a duty to understand what really lies beneath this case," she said firmly. "This is no longer just about property or trespass." The emotional weight of the moment was felt by everyone. Here was a man who had come quietly to defend himself, bringing with him only his loyal dog and his memories, and yet had uncovered something larger than anyone expected, a hidden past that was begging to be revealed. Keanu remained quiet but resolute. His kindness and humility shone through every word he spoke, his gentle treatment of Max showing his deep respect, not just for the animal but for life itself, for truth, for history. The judge called for a brief recess to gather her thoughts and order a review of the old military records connected to Project Nightshade. As the courtroom slowly emptied again, Max returned to Keanu's side, pressing close to him, tail wagging softly, eyes calm and faithful. Keanu whispered to him gently, "You're doing good, Max. We're almost there." The story was far from over, but something had changed. What started as a simple lawsuit was now becoming a journey into the past, led by a man's loyalty, a dog's instincts, and a truth that refused to stay buried. The bond between Keanu and Max, quiet but unbreakable, was now guiding them toward a mystery larger than themselves. And the world was watching. The courtroom doors creaked open again that afternoon. But this time when Judge Walters entered, she did not look like the same woman who had left only an hour before. Her face, always calm and composed, carried a heaviness that was impossible to miss. Her steps were slower, her shoulders seemed weighed down by memories, and there was a distant look in her eyes that hinted at a past she had kept hidden from the world for many years. She sat quietly behind the bench, glancing at the piece of cloth lying carefully folded beside her. Then she raised her gaze slowly, first toward Victor Hayes and then toward Keanu Reeves, who sat silently with Max at his side. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was softer than before, but filled with a seriousness that made the entire room lean forward. "Before we continue," she said, "I must share something. Something from my own history." A ripple of surprise passed through the courtroom. It was rare, almost unheard of, for a judge to speak about personal matters during a trial. But today was no ordinary day, and this was no ordinary trial. Judge Walters took a slow breath and began. "Years ago, when I was fresh out of law school, I was offered a position in a government office. A quiet department, buried deep within the system, far from public view. I was eager, idealistic, wanting to serve my country. But what I discovered, there still haunts me to this day." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the piece of cloth. "This symbol," she said, holding it up, "was the insignia of Project Nightshade. It was a program that most people have never heard of, and for good reason. Its records were sealed, its operations hidden." She paused, her eyes glistening now with emotion. Project Nightshade was supposed to be about defense research. That's what they told us. But behind the locked doors, there were experiments that should never have been allowed. They tested on animals, sometimes worse. They buried their work in secrecy, along with the waste from their experiments, on remote pieces of land like the very property at the heart of this case. A shocked silence fell over the room. Even the most skeptical faces now reflected discomfort and unease. Victor Hayes, sitting stiffly at the plaintiff's table, began to sweat. His fingers tapped nervously on the polished wood. His face, usually pale and smug, was flushed with anger and fear. Judge Walters continued, her voice growing steadier with every word. "I left that office as soon as I realized the truth. But I could not expose what I had seen. Every attempt was met with threats, warnings, reminders that certain things were meant to stay buried. And so for years, I stayed silent." She looked directly at Keanu. "But today, your dog, this dog, has unearthed not only a symbol but a piece of history that should never have been forgotten." Keanu nodded slowly, gratitude shining in his eyes. Max sat at his feet, watching the judge carefully, as if he understood the gravity of her confession. Then Judge Walters turned sharply toward Victor Hayes. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice now sharp and cutting, "were you aware that this land was once a dumping ground for Project Nightshade?" Victor hesitated. For a moment, it seemed as if he would lie. But then, under the weight of the judge's gaze and the silence of the courtroom, he spoke. "I knew there were old records," he admitted, his voice thin, "but I didn't think they mattered. That was a long time ago. No one cares anymore." His words fell flat. The courtroom audience, packed with ordinary people, reporters, even court clerks, sat frozen in disbelief. Keanu remained seated, his expression calm but watchful. He did not speak a word. His silence was powerful, filled with dignity and quiet determination. Judge Walters took a deep breath. "Mr. Reeves," she said gently, "I understand now why you were on that land. Why you returned, but I must ask, how did your dog know where to dig? How did Max uncover this hidden history? Keanu finally spoke, his voice soft but unwavering. Your Honor, he said, Max has always had a gift. I trained him to recognize certain scents and symbols when we used to walk those fields together. Long before this case, before the fences went up, before the cameras appeared, Max remembered things that even I could not. Every time we passed the old path, he would stop, dig, point me toward places I would never have noticed. And when I finally followed his lead, we found this. He held up another object, a small metal tag, rusted but legible under the lights. The number etched into it matched military identification codes, confirming that this was no ordinary junk. This was evidence. The audience could feel the shift in the story now. This was no longer just about Keanu and Victor. It was about a hidden chapter of history that was demanding to be brought into the light. Victor Hayes lowered his head, his face a mask of shame and fear. His lawyers whispered urgently into his ear, but the damage was done. The courtroom had turned. The audience, the judge, even the court clerks, all now understood that Keanu's presence there was not an accident. It was destiny. It was justice waiting to be served. Judge Walters leaned forward and spoke clearly so that everyone could hear. This court will order an immediate review of all records related to Project Nightshade. I will not allow this history to remain buried. She paused and then added, her voice softening, Mr. Reeves, your dog Max did something no one else could. He found the truth beneath the lies. And for that, this court thanks you both. The moment was deeply emotional. The camera would linger on Keanu, who bent down and wrapped his arms gently around Max's strong neck. Max licked his face softly, his tail thumping gently against the floor. It was a quiet moment, but it spoke volumes about loyalty, resilience, respect, and kindness. Even in the face of dark history, the audience watching this story unfold would feel every beat of this moment, every note of sorrow and hope intertwined. Outside, reporters crowded the steps of the courthouse, ready to broadcast this stunning twist to the world. But inside, in this silent room, the bond between a man and his dog had just revealed something powerful. A history waiting to be uncovered and a truth no one could ignore. The story was not over yet. But everything had changed. The sun was low in the sky as the courtroom filled once more. Shadows stretched long across the polished floors, and a quiet sense of anticipation settled over everyone present. This was no longer just a legal proceeding. It was becoming something far greater, a reckoning. A search for truth that had waited decades to come to light. Keanu Reeves sat at the defense table, his fingers resting gently on Max's thick fur. The bond between them seemed even stronger now, as if the long hours and heavy revelations of the past few days had only deepened their connection. Max sat calmly at his side, his gaze steady and alert, his every movement speaking of quiet loyalty and purpose. Victor Hayes was also in the room, but the air around him had changed. Where once he sat tall and confident, now he seemed smaller, weighed down by the eyes watching him, the judgment hanging in the air even before a verdict had been reached. He could feel it, the shift. The courtroom no longer believed his story. Judge Walters took her seat slowly, her fingers brushing the surface of the old cloth once more before setting it carefully aside. She turned her gaze toward Victor and spoke in a voice that was steady but carried the weight of authority. Mr. Hayes, she said, evidence has emerged suggesting you may have known about the hidden history of this land. Before we proceed, you will answer this court's questions honestly. Victor swallowed hard, his throat dry. He glanced toward his lawyers who whispered urgently to him, but it was clear their strategies were crumbling. With a shaky breath, Victor stood. Your Honor, he began, his voice lacking its usual smoothness. I purchased that land through legal channels. The records I was shown did not mention Project Nightshade by name, but Judge Walters raised a hand, stopping him. The documents uncovered by Mr. Reeves and his dog tell a different story, she said. Military tags, symbols, artifacts buried deep in the soil. And more than that, I have ordered a preliminary search of your estate. Last night, investigators found sealed crates buried behind your property. Crates marked with that same symbol. Care to explain? A ripple of shock moved through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicking at every word. Victor hesitated, his face pale now, sweat glistening on his forehead. Those crates, he whispered. I didn't think anyone would ever find them. The words slipped out before he could stop them, and immediately the meaning was clear. It was a confession, simple, soft, undeniable. Keanu remained seated, showing no outward reaction. His calmness made the moment even more powerful. His humility, his quiet respect for the process, made the contrast with Victor's desperation all the more striking. Judge Walters leaned forward slightly. Continue, she ordered, her voice quiet but firm. Victor lowered his gaze, unable to meet the eyes of the judge or anyone in the courtroom. When I bought the land, he said, I was told there were things buried there, remnants from old government projects. I was warned not to dig too deep. But when I discovered what was really there, old records, strange equipment, files documenting experiments, I chose to hide them. I didn't want anyone asking questions. I buried the crates behind my estate. Far from prying eyes, his voice cracked. I thought if I kept quiet, if I built my fences, no one would ever know. Long silence followed his words, heavy and painful. Judge Walters nodded slowly. And yet it was not another lawyer, not a government investigator, not a reporter who found the truth, she said. It was a man walking his dog, honoring a promise to someone he lost. She turned to Keanu, her expression softening for the first time that day. Mr. Reeves, she said, your calm, your humility, and your respect for this court have not gone unnoticed. And your dog Max, his loyalty and instinct uncovered a truth that was buried not only in the earth, but in history itself. The courtroom felt different now. What began as a simple lawsuit had grown into a story about courage, grief, loyalty, and quiet resilience. Every person watching felt the depth of it, the emotional journey of a man who had lost everything, but still kept a promise, guided by the silent partnership with his dog. Outside, reporters broadcast the news around the world. Inside, Keanu reached down, scratching Max gently behind the ears, their bond playing for all to see. Judge Walters spoke again, this time addressing everyone present. This case has revealed more than I expected, she said. The crates found it. Mr. Hayes' estate will be reviewed by federal authorities. The records buried on the land in question will be preserved, examined, and made public where appropriate. This history will not be hidden any longer. Then, turning back to Victor, her tone sharpened. And as for you, Mr. Hayes, this court will recommend further investigation into your role in concealing these materials. You may face additional charges pending that inquiry. Victor sank into his seat, defeated. All his confidence, his bluster, his arrogance, gone. Keanu remained quiet, his respect and humility shining through even now. He had never raised his voice. He had never spoken in anger. He had simply trusted his dog, honored his promise, and let the truth speak for itself. The session ended for the day, and as the crowd slowly filed out, reporters shouting questions that no one was prepared to answer, Keanu knelt beside Max once again. You did good, buddy, he whispered softly, pressing his forehead to Max's. You found what no one else could. Max wagged his tail gently, leaning into Keanu's embrace. The world would remember this case, not as a legal battle won or lost, but as a testament to loyalty, resilience, kindness, and quiet courage. And at the center of it all was a man and his dog, Two souls bound by love, memory, and the unbreakable promise of truth. But the story was not quite over yet. One final chapter remained. The next morning, light streamed through the tall courtroom windows, casting golden rays across the polished floor. It felt different now, not just a room for legal argument, but a place where hidden truths had finally come into the light. People filled every seat, reporters lined the walls, their pens and cameras ready to capture every word, every expression. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in his usual place, his hand resting gently on Max's broad head. Max sat calmly at his side, eyes bright, ears alert, as if he too sensed that today would bring resolution, that today the weight they had carried would finally ease. Judge Walters entered slowly, but she walked taller than before. The burden of secrecy she had carried for decades was lighter now, replaced by determination. She sat at the bench and took a deep breath before speaking. The entire room seemed to hold its breath along with her. "This court has heard extraordinary testimony," she began. "What began as a simple lawsuit has exposed a history long buried, a history that affected not only this land, but the lives of many who were forgotten." She turned her gaze toward Victor Hayes. "Mr. Hayes, your actions in concealing the truth, burying records, hiding crates marked with the symbol of Project Nightshade, show not only dishonesty, but a reckless disregard for history and for the harm caused to this community." Victor sat motionless, pale and defeated, the weight of shame heavy on his shoulders. The judge then turned toward Keanu. Her expression softened, her eyes reflecting respect and quiet admiration. "Mr. Reeves," she said gently, "you came to this courtroom not seeking fame or revenge, but to honor a promise, a deeply personal promise made to someone you loved and lost. You did not shout. You did not demand. You trusted your instincts, your memories, and above all, your dog, Max." Her voice grew warmer. "In doing so, you helped this court and this community face a truth that was hidden for too long. Your respect, humility, and quiet strength have moved us all." A wave of emotion passed through the courtroom. People nodded quietly, some wiping tears from their eyes. The atmosphere was heavy yet hopeful, a rare feeling in a place so often filled with conflict and argument. Judge Walters continued, "Therefore, I dismiss the charges against you, Mr. Reeves. This court finds that your presence on the land was driven not by malice, but by duty, love, and a desire for truth." A soft murmur spread through the room. Keanu remained calm, his expression humble and peaceful, but a quiet shine appeared in his eyes as he looked down at Max, who sat faithfully by his side. But then Judge Walters did something unexpected. She stood up from behind the bench, walked slowly down the steps, and crossed the floor to stand directly in front of Keanu and Max. With great care, she knelt down beside Max and reached out her hand, gently stroking the dog's head. Max leaned into her touch, closing his eyes for a moment of peace. "You did something no one else could," she whispered, her words soft but clear enough for the entire room to hear. "You found what had been lost, and you reminded us all of the power of loyalty and kindness." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of cameras quietly clicking, capturing this deeply human and emotional moment. A judge kneeling before a dog, acknowledging his role in uncovering a long-buried truth. Then, rising slowly, she addressed the entire courtroom one last time. "I will order that the land in question be preserved as a memorial site, a place where history will be remembered properly. No fences, no secrets. It will belong to everyone now." Keanu's eyes filled with quiet tears, but he did not wipe them away. Instead, he bent down, wrapped his arms around Max and whispered, "We did it, buddy. You did it." Outside the courthouse, a large crowd had gathered, waiting to hear the outcome. But inside, in this quiet space, the story reached its true end, not with shouts or arguments, but with dignity, grace, and deep emotion. As Keanu walked slowly out of the courtroom, Max at his side, they passed Victor Hayes, who sat slumped. In his chair, a man broken not by the court, but by the quiet power of truth. Outside, reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing, microphones extended. But Keanu paused, knelt beside Max, and scratched behind his ears. He smiled gently, speaking only to him. "You're a good boy, Max, thank you." The crowd fell silent for a moment, watching as man and dog shared this private moment of quiet victory. Then, standing tall, Keanu whispered one last time, "Let's go home." The bond between them was unbreakable. Their journey had not only revealed a hidden past, but had healed something deep inside. A promise fulfilled, a memory honored, and a lesson taught to everyone watching, that respect, humility, resilience, and kindness could change everything. And as they walked away together, side by side, the world watched and remembered.